So welcome to all of you in the consortium. What a delight it is to be with you again and to greet you just a few days before I learned some of you are having actually an extra day next week on holiday. We are doing session 3 on vocabulary. Now we hope to do it in 2, but we had so much information and it's so critical, such a great predictor of comprehension that we are doing a 3rd session on it. Now, having met so many of you over time, I know that your actual knowledge level is very high. So as we go through this, you're going to say, ooh, I know that, I know that, I know that, but hopefully you'll also say, ooh, I should do that. I should incorporate that. I should think about that. So my hope is that you'll both have affirmation of what you know, as well as additional information. Now, like in all of our past trainings, starting with things such as opportunities to respond training, we are going to be actively involved. So you need some paper right next to you. I've got my yellow tablet all set. And I would like you on one piece of paper to write best practices. And so if there is a aha moment, something that you say, ooh, I should add that to my repertoire, then I want you to make a note of it. And at the end of our time, you're going to put in the chat box what was your takeaway, what you could utilize in your classroom setting, what you could follow up as a coach. So be certain that you have something written down. And again, just a reminder of the importance of overt responses in the classroom, overt responses in a webinar. And so sometimes I'm going to today ask you to write down information and then I'll give you feedback on it. Sometimes we will say short answers together. Sometimes we will read something together. Sometimes I'll do closed reading, I'll read, stop, and you'll say the next word. So just know that you will be participating. And it's a reminder of how critical it is. You know, this week, yesterday, I was working with a school district in Nebraska, Lincoln Public Schools, and we watched 4 elementary lessons. And it was a math lesson, a lesson in intervention in reading, and 2 lessons that were in general ed classes in 2nd and 4th grade. And what was amazing to me is that as the opportunities to respond went up, there was a significant reduction in any disruptive behavior from the students. One teacher had 14 responses in a minute, an average. Whoa. The other 3 teachers, the responses were more involved, but they still had between 3 and 5 opportunities to respond. So it reminds us that even as I do this webinar, that we are going to have opportunities to respond. So as we start this time, we have been looking at what most of the researchers in the area of vocabulary suggest that we need in our classrooms. And for example, exposing students to high quality oral language. And that brought us to the concept of fast mapping, giving students just a little explanation, just a little explanation, just a little explanation of a lot of words, just flooding them with the highest vocabulary and flooding them with little definitions. Because once that seed is planted, they're much more aware of the word, much more likely to add it to their repertoire. And we actually know from some studies that when they measure the quality of teacher language in the classroom, it's very predictive of the actual language gains for students in that class. And then last time we talked about explicit teaching of vocabulary, which we're going to do a very quick review of, but we're going to focus on teaching students how to figure out the meanings of unknown words, and also how to encourage them to read and read and read some more. For as we gain in our decoding skills, much of our vocabulary comes from what we read. So that is sort of our path today. We are going to review selection of vocabulary, which we talked about last time, and a routine for explicitly teaching vocabulary, and some extensions and some practice activities. That's review, though some of them we'll touch on a little bit deeper. And then we're going to look at word learning strategies. And my favorite research-based strategies for using context clues, my own research on teaching kids how to pronounce and utilize prefixes and suffixes to figure out the pronunciation of a word, but also to figure out meanings, and then using other sources, which certainly has changed in the period of my career, from teaching kids dictionary skills where we had to figure out the alphabet and what came next and how to proceed to find something in a dictionary. Now we just type in the word and boom, the definition pops up. But there's still some skills that we need to teach, particularly how to pick the right definition when it is a word that has many, many meanings. And then a little bit about wide reading, getting kids to read, which is a little challenge. So when we started this, we talked about how some researchers basically said that we should like flood the children with vocabulary, just flood them with it, utilize our highest vocabulary and constantly give little explanations, and simultaneously to teach the students how to, what the meanings of a few words were, and also how to figure out the meanings of the word. Basically, my conclusion is we need to flood and few. We need to do both of these. So we're going to start with a little review of what we covered last time. So you need that scratch paper, not your best practices page, but a scratch paper. And the first thing that we talked about in terms of explicit teaching of vocabulary was the selection, what we would think about as we selected the words. For example, I am sitting here with Michelle sent me a very long list of words for wit and wisdom. And I'm going to go through this with her, but choosing which words to put in time in terms of teaching them in depth versus just giving them a fast mapping definition, just a short definition, was challenging when it was so many words. So I want you to think about what you would look for words for in-depth instruction. For example, I would want to have words that were unknown. So if I thought the word was known, then I probably would not be teaching it. So I looked at this list and I said, are there any words that I think that students would already know the meaning of? And one of them was the word healthy. And so I could do a very quick review of that word because I presume they already know it. All right. So you're going to write down other criteria that you might have. So doing it now, you don't have to put it in the chat box, just write it on your paper under selection. All right. So I had you prepare your answer. And if we were in the classroom, I'd have you share with a partner. Then I'd give feedback or have you share it with the class. But we will modify that. So get ready to check yours. First of all, we did talk about a limited number of words. So this list has more than 25. We would not teach all of those in one session. We would limit it and probably in a number of studies in terms of cognitive overload, what you can take in. They suggested somewhere between 4 and 5 in a session. And then I got an email from a teacher in your districts who said, we have a long list before passages. How are we going to teach that 4 to 5? Well, first of all, if it's a long passage, you can divide the passage into 3 or 4 segments, and then just teach the vocabulary for that segment, read that, teach the words for the next segment and the next segment and the next segment, so that you could have an appropriate number. And, okay, the first one I gave you, the words are already not, the words I'm going to teach are unknown, so that I can put my energy into words that the students don't know. Now, we're usually picking words for, as the list that I got on Wit and Wisdom was for a passage the students were going to read. And so I would ask myself, is this a critical word in the passage? If you didn't know it, would you still be able to gain the meaning of it? If it was absolutely critical to the passage understanding, then I would want to give it more in-depth instruction. And is it a word that they are going to utilize in the future? And so I'm looking for words that are useful in the moment, useful in the future. My next criteria was, is there anything in the word that is generalizable, that takes us beyond that specific word? And so maybe it has relatives. And so as I looked at this word list, some of the words had many words that would go with it. Yesterday, I was teaching the word in a demonstration for teachers, the word protect. And that word, we have protect, protects, protecting, protected, protector, protection, many words. So that one had extra value for me to teach it because it had relatives. And here they had the word settle. And so we have settle, settles, settled, settling, settler, settlement. We have many relatives, which makes it extra valuable to teach. Maybe it has a meaningful part, a prefix, a suffix, or a root that would generalize to other words, making it there's more benefit in giving it time. And then finally, some words are just more difficult and deserve more instructional time. So I looked down this list, and one of the words is hoofs. That has a definite reference. It's easy to teach, easy to remember, and I can show it visually, and so I would give it less time. However, many of the other words don't have an automatic, easy to remember reference, and so I might need to give it more time. For example, when I look at these words, and it has a word like flourished, I might need to give that a little extra time. So these are the criteria that I would utilize, which we practiced last time. Okay, so next question. I taught you a strategy. In fact, I actually didn't even do it just last time. One of our first sessions, I showed you a vocabulary lesson in 4th grade, and there were 4 steps that we used in teaching the vocabulary word, taken from many studies on vocabulary instruction. So I want you to put up 4 fingers and tell yourself the steps. Now I'm going to give you the first one, just because it's been a while since we've talked. The first is, if I'm going to teach a vocabulary word, I want to be certain that I introduce the pronunciation of the word. Okay, so your job is to touch your fingers and say the other 3 steps. Okay, and so feedback. I am going to, leaving your fingers up there, I'm going to teach you the pronunciation. I'm going to teach you the meaning of the word. I am going to give you some examples of it as they obtain to our passage, but also might obtain to your personal life. And I'm going to ask questions to check your understanding. And so now, pronunciation, meaning, examples, checking for understanding. And so taking this away, say it to yourself again. Pronunciation, meaning, examples, checking for understanding. So I did that because what we're doing here is retrieval practice. I'm having you retrieve. I'm not just going through it as a recap. I'm having you retrieve what we learned in the past. And just yesterday, I had modeled this in another webinar, and a teacher said, we are going to read informational text. And what makes it different from a narrative story is that there are real people, real things, real places. Real people, real things, real places. Put your fingers up, and the kids practiced it. At the end of the lesson, she said, put your 3 fingers up, touch them, and say what we would find in informational text. And every single kid remembered it, put their finger up, real people, real things, real places. So sometimes she picked that up because I didn't point it out and utilized it in her class. So, but here we just did retrieval practice first on what are the criteria for picking words and what we would do with teaching a word. Pronunciation, meaning, examples, and understanding. So I did get, there were 4 emails from different teachers in your districts. How lovely. One of them asked, would you go over when you use examples and non-examples? So I pulled up one of the practice items I gave you last time. And in it, we were teaching the word parallel. And when we had one of those words, that's a tier 3 word, a domain specific word, we almost always introduce the meaning of it by listing out the critical attributes. So to know parallel, you have to know it's talking about 2 lines that are equal distance from each other and will not intersect. And all 3 of those attributes have to be in place. So if I have 1 line, there's no concept of parallel because there has to be at least 2 lines. And if they aren't equal distance, it's not parallel. And if we extended them and they intersected, it wouldn't be parallel. So we introduced the pronunciation, parallel, and I might have you tap out the oral syllables, parallel. And in this case, the students had a math log and they wrote parallel in the math log. And then we introduced the meaning, utilizing the critical attributes that are listed. So all of these have to be in place in order for it to be parallel. And then the students could list those same attributes in their log. And then the next step would be to give examples. So when do you need to utilize both examples and non-examples was the question. And basically, when there is a need for a definite discernment between when it would be, in this case, parallel, and when it would not be. So if the concept is one that raises the question of, can you distinguish when it is the concept and when not, then when discernment is necessary, you utilize examples and non-examples. So not all words need that, but if discernment is needed, yes. So here, they would need examples of parallel, where all the attributes were in place. There are 2 lines, and they are not, they are equal distance and they're not going to intersect. But then we also would firm that up by giving non-examples. So here we have two lines, but they will intersect, thus they are not parallel. And here we have two lines that are not parallel because they would eventually intersect. And then we would check their understanding. And here we would check their understanding by asking them, are these lines parallel? And the answer is no. And why? Because they will intersect. Are these lines parallel? Why? Because there's two lines and they are equal distance and they will never intersect. So the checking for understanding here would be with examples and non-examples. And then we might have the students generate examples and non-examples. So if confusion can emerge as to does the concept apply or not, then discernment is something we have to look at, and we use both examples and non-examples when we illustrate it and when we check understanding. Okay, that was a follow-up question. Now, at the very end of our time, last time, we looked at some things that we might add to teaching the vocabulary words, where we introduced the words, pronunciation, and then we introduced the meaning, then we gave examples, and then we checked for understanding. So on your paper, I want you to write the word extensions, and we're just going to list what has appeared to be useful additions to teaching individual words. My turn first. So I write down, part of speech. Okay, see if you can add to that, and you use your own background knowledge too of what might be useful. After we have done a pretty in-depth job, are there any other extensions that could be infused in the lesson that would be helpful? All right, so let me just share a few and see if you have some of these on your list. So if the kids are in 4th grade and above, I could not find a study that was lower than that, but in 4th grade and above, the students had more retention of the words if they knew if it was a noun, person, place, or thing, a verb, an action word, an adjective that told more about a noun, an adverb. One day I taught that and a boy raised his hand and said, adverb. Oh, you add it to a verb. Oh, yes, yes. We've all missed that point. Adverb, add it to a verb. You might, as relevance would go, introduce for the students synonyms, words that have same or similar meaning, or antonyms, the opposite. But you have to pick out, is it going to be of assistance? And the students would have to know the meanings of the synonyms and antonyms for them to be really helpful. Most tier 3 words, those academic vocabulary, don't have a synonym. The ones that are most likely to have a synonym or an antonym are the general academic vocabulary. Last time we went through tier 2 words. So I was teaching compulsory, and these in 5th grade, and these were words that were synonyms, similar, required, mandatory, unavoidable, demanded, imperative, and antonyms, optional, not mandatory, avoidable. And it's another way to extend vocabulary, because if I've taught compulsory and then introduced these words that are synonyms or antonyms, it also gives the students a exposure to words. And so this was one that you could practice on your own. One study found that it was useful if the students in some cases were told how the word was being used. So, for example, the word mischief is pretty much utilized in one case. He got into mischief, she got into mischief, the dog got into mischief, and it's almost stated in that way. And so showing kids how to utilize the word was useful. And giving additional information, particularly the research that's been done on word maps or semantic maps. So, for example, going back to our first session where we talked about doing in kindergarten, first and second grade, particularly doing informational read-alouds as a way to expand vocabulary. And I used the example of a book on owls as a part of a unit on birds that we initiated in a second grade. And as we read each topic, the teacher, which was, I taught it myself to a group, not recently, before the COVID. And as we did it, we figured out the topic and then listed the details. In front of it, as a result, we had this word map that we could go back and review what we had learned about owls. So we could have a word map such as this. And remember, I told you that I worked with a teacher teaching protect. And so we utilized this structure to connect, to do the instruction and connect it to other words. So we had the definition, synonyms and antonyms, the structure of the word protect, and other related words, and then sentences that contained the word, and then the students generated a completion to the third one. But it is what we'd call a word map, and we could use this structure again and again and again with students. And this is a more complex one. That is a semantic map of meaningful connections that the students kept adding to as we studied in 5th or 6th grade, the organization of our federal government. And sometimes it feels that it's that complex. Okay, what else? A little history of a word. I have a whole book on word origins, and sometimes, particularly when I teach 4th and 5th graders, I'll look up a word and learn, well, how did that come into English? What's the history of that word? Definitely got the kids to be thinking about words. Deadline came during World War II, when there was, in Germany, prisoners were held in the forest with a trench around the area. They were in the middle, and the actual guards were on the outside. And if you stepped beyond that trench, you were killed. So they called it a deadline. And again, we could also introduce meaningful parts. And, you know, this is the glory of English, is the utilization of prefixes and suffixes and roots to extend our lexicon and extend our lexicon of words available in English. So if I have taught, predict beforehand, I'm able to think of what's coming. And so before, I fix it before. I mix it before, and I prevent it. I keep it from happening before. So extending it to other words. And this is the one we already looked at, introducing the family of words. And I've got to emphasize this again and again. And it was emphasized in the materials I got on Wit and Wisdom. When they had settle and settler and settles and settlement. It's the best and fastest way to extend vocabulary. So one day I was teaching conform, and I talked about Jason always will conform with others to look like them, act like them. Jason always conforms. Last year, he did the same thing. He wanted to look like and act like everyone else. He conformed. He is very conforming. In fact, conformity is almost a religion to him. He is a conformist. But on the other hand, in our classroom, we have Michael, and Michael is a non-conformist. He doesn't want to look like anyone else and act like anyone else and do anything like anyone else. He is non-conforming. He is equally dedicated to non-conformity. So expanding, see, I taught one word, but look what I got out of that one word. So introduce the relatives. Just a little note though, sometimes don't you wish that English did not have some complexities? But when we look at the relatives, like in here, conform, 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 conform. We see conform in terms of the spelling within each of these words. And we also have a consistent meaning, to be like anyone else, everyone else. And we have consistent pronunciation, conforming, conformity, non-conformist. In all of them, we hear conform. Okay, but here's the challenge that English throws at us, is that words in the same family generally always have the same spelling. Maybe a slight alteration when we add other roots together, but the same spelling. And they have the same meaning. The problem is the pronunciation varies. The pronunciation varies. So sometimes children don't recognize that they're the same family and can't transfer the meaning because the pronunciation has been altered. So memorable events in my teaching career when this was interesting. So I was teaching a story with, it was either second or third graders, and it had the words wild and wilderness. Now there is wild, same spelling, same meaning, but different pronunciation. So the students did not know that there might be a little wild in the wilderness. So we had to write it down and point out that there is wild in the wilderness. So just remember this, that words of the family always have similar spelling and meaning, but different pronunciation can occur. This is a high school example, but it was a delightful day of teaching the Reformation. And we had reform and reformation, reform, reformation. And the students did not get the connection. And then we had Catholic and Catholicism. Same challenge until they saw it, that there was a little Catholic in Catholicism. And that day, I wrote them on the board. Only the 3 Catholics in the room got the connection before, when they just heard Catholic and Catholicism. But then I told them, let's say you didn't know how to spell Catholicism, but if you know Catholic, you write it down first, and then you go from there to add to it to make Catholicism. And it was like a wow. And then the most interesting thing that day was the whole room was filled with Protestants, but they did not know that Protestant came from the word protest. Because again, spelling same, meaning same, protest the Catholic Church, but the pronunciation altered it. So just be aware of that as you are teaching particularly older kids and the words that they're getting. And we should introduce multisyllabic words. Now, this was another question. The person who emailed me had 1 question, 2 questions, 3 questions, 4 questions, I think 5 total. Should we teach multiple meanings? Yes, but after you've taught the meaning as it's going to appear in the passage or in the unit that you're teaching. So that the students have a chance to master one before we add to it. So I just gave an example to you. I was teaching the word instrumental, meaning very, very important. So I introduced the pronunciation of the word instrumental. I introduced the meaning of it, very important. I gave them synonyms and antonyms and gave them examples of instrumental. Ricardo was instrumental in the team's win. And Ms. Thompson wrote a recommendation. It was instrumental in Margaret's acceptance at the university. It was really, really important. And then I had them check for understanding by generating examples, saying who was important, instrumental in their own life, why. And not until we had practiced instrumental in terms of the meaning of important did I then introduce instrumental related to music made by instruments. So it is not that we shouldn't introduce it, but we should introduce one till we are really solid on it and then introduce the others. It goes right back to cognitive overload. I want to teach in small bites so that you've mastered it, and then I will add to it so that you do not get confused, you do not get too many ideas coming in to your understanding. Well, the last thing I wanted to talk about was how might we go back and practice this? And in the last video that we watched quite a long time ago, I had the students just simply do this as probably the easiest review practice you could have. These are words that I had taught. We had them on a word wall, and we had them numbered, and 1 through 10. And then if we had more words, maybe we did the words that were backed in blue, 1 through 10, and then we had red 1 through 10, and yellow 1 through 10, and orange 1 through 10. So I could say, let's look at the orange words. I'm going to tell you about one of these words. You're going to figure out what word it is, and then you're going to show me. A very simple, you know, I so adore high outcome, low prep. And that's what this would be. High outcome, we're practicing in space practice the meaning of the words, but it's not going to be a lot of prep for me, the teacher, because I already have them listed up here so that the students could do this. So now, of all these practice activities, which are listed in your handout last time, we just didn't get to them all. That is one of my favorites. So there it is again. And where we have the words listed. Now, when we look at the research on vocabulary, and we even look beyond it into higher order thinking, one of the things that Marzano's research showed is that we need to have students constantly doing compare and contrast, compare and contrast, compare and contrast. So I've started doing this when I teach vocabulary lessons. For example, why is reading a book in a library not considered loitering, while standing in front of a mini market is considered loitering? Or comparing two words, why might we have gratitude for a kind classmate and not for a roguish classmate? Definitely the students are going to have to be thinking about the meanings of both words. But let's look at some other modifications in some practice activities. And let me just, I'm skipping ahead. One that is so easy is having students write examples. So the day I taught agriculture, I had them make a list of any words that came to mind about agriculture. And so that they could store that together. Agriculture, they could list the products, they could list the tools like the tractor, they could list things like the farm or the ranch. And so this was one student's list. Whoa. And that would help nail down what agriculture is about, making all those relationships. Why would I suggest this one? This is going to strengthen their ability to recall the word because of all of the connections, but also it was low prep. Here's the word we've learned. Write down all of the words you can think of that relate to this and be able to tell why you added it to that list. Another practice activity, and this one is really useful in like 5th grade. And that is to have the students stand with a partner and they have a list of vocabulary words and they have to engage in conversation where they utilize these words. And as they do it, they're going to check them off. So if I started the discussion, I might say, wow, can you believe the level of taxation, the taxes that we are supposed to pay to England? And the next person says, yep, I have a lot of grievances in my life, but paying taxes is one of the biggest. And goes back, yep, you know, living in these colonies is hard enough without having paying taxes to Great Britain. Do you know that we don't even have any representation in Great Britain concerning taxes? They just say pay it, and no one's there to protect us. Can you believe that? I just wish we could break away and have some independence. Well, maybe we'll have a war, like a revolution. Well, that would be hard, but maybe it would lead to a stronger democracy. Can you see how this would be for your 5th graders, make them think about the words? I was looking at some of these lists that I got on Wit and Wisdom. They would be perfect for this. All right, so word sorts work well if you have words that really strengthen your understanding, if you can put them in categories. So this is one that I did in relationship to, is it in the legislative, executive, judicial branch? We had studied it, and so we are going to say, well, the senators are in the legislative branch, the justices are in the judicial branch, the vice president is in the executive branch, but also in the legislative branch as the head of the Senate. Okay. All right. Now, this one I want to reiterate. The next two are my most important practice activities. In a number of studies, they've asked this question: what do teachers do to have students practice vocabulary? And the most common answer is, I ask my children to write sentences to show their understanding of the words. But let's say I had this list and asked the students to do that. I adapted, I conquered, it was exotic, I defeated, I destroyed, or the very best one I've ever had. Number 1 is adapted, number 2 is conquered, number 3 is exotic. When I went over to the child, I said, that's not what I wanted. And he said, they're complete sentences. They have a subject and a verb. I said, okay, but never in the future. He said, okay. So the problem is that we often don't really get the students to think about the meanings of the words. So I'd like to suggest 2 methods. You could adopt either one to empower your sentence, lift them up. One of them we refer to as meaningful sentences, and originally it occurred in Success for All. Okay, and so here, the students had to write a meaningful sentence utilizing a vocabulary term, and it had to answer, and the teacher would say 3 or 4 of these questions. So if the word was meager, you could not turn it in, it was meager. you've not answered 3 or 4 of these questions. But it would be okay to turn this one in at the end of the month. When? Our dinners, what? Were meager because we had little money. Why? Now, I love this activity. If I was going to pick a practice activity for my 4th or 5th graders, this would be my favorite, because look at what we're getting out of this. Practice writing sentences with the vocabulary term, showing more understanding of that term, but also learning how to add details to our sentences, forgive me, that is going to strengthen writing. In fact, we have proof of that. A study that was done by Steve Graham looked for what can we tell students in intermediate grades to improve their writing. And here it was. Add details, 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 add details. So we're practicing writing complete sentences, practicing the meaning of the word, and adding details to enrich our writing. Get a lot out of this. Put this one down if you happen to be a teacher of particularly 4th and 5th graders. Well, is there anything else in terms of sentence writing? Because I told you there was going to be 2. Here's another one. And this is just an example, an Ohio example of taking a word irrigation and then writing a sentence that would have in July, when farmers in Ohio began irrigation. What? Because of the hot, dry days that could kill or damage crops, and why? All right. Here's the other method that I found in one study that made good sense. And that was having the students write a meaningful sentence, not about one word, but use 2 words. So the day I was reading this chapter, these were the words I had taught. And I said, you're going to write a sentence that is meaningful, that is a complete sentence, including the words loitering and coward. And this is one of the children's examples. Now, so let's say that I taught agriculture and irrigation, and they're going to write a sentence such as this using both words. All right, my hope is that you will go through those and write which of them kind of appeals to you as a practice activity. And I'd like you just to throw into the chat box at this moment, which one appeals to you? Is it a comparison? And I skipped over here listing examples, any word that relates to it, which is exactly how we store that schema. Is it having conversations with a list of words? Is it word sorts? Is it writing a sentence that is meaningful? Or is it writing a sentence that utilizes 2 words? So if you would pop into the chat box, which of those might be appealing to you, including listing the words on the wall, just which we call a word list. I'm thinking about a word, you form it on your table and you show it. All right. Loretta, you are going to watch that as they come in and just give me an idea of which ones seem to be popular.
Meaningful sentences and conversations seem to be big. I've seen comparison and a word wall and a word sort, but a lot of conversation is coming up.
You know, it's one we've never thought about, really. I bet almost none of us have ever done that. And wouldn't that be a rich experience? Absolutely. Okay, thank you, thank you. All right, but we are going to shift gears. And rest of our time is going to look at word learning strategies. And so keep your chat box thoughts on for a moment. And here is the question. What strategies can students use to determine the meaning of unknown words? Okay, and you get to put in one answer. What strategy would be the most useful if you were reading along and you did not know the meaning of a word, not the pronunciation, because the only thing that helps with pronunciation is looking at the letters and using the letters to form the pronunciation, but the meaning of them. So pop into the chat box. Loretta's going to be watching. I'm just wanting to see what would be your major idea.
Well, I think we all are in each other's heads because everybody's put context clues.
You know what? It's the right answer, because context clues is the first thing that you would utilize. Beautiful. So that's exactly what you should have been thinking about, is context clues. They're the most likely to give you a better meaning of the word. Now, you could also look within the word and see if there is a root word you know, a prefix you know, a suffix you know. And you can also look it up in a dictionary, glossary, or other source. But you're right, context clues come first. They come first because you are reading along with the intent to figure out meaning. And you are processing it with the intention to figure out meaning. And you say to yourself, that word I don't know, but I'm going to read more to see if I can get any hints or clues about the meaning of the word. Now, there are many strategies that people have used for context clues. But my favorite is inside outside. It's easy to remember. It could be used if I was reading a book with third graders. It could be used with a science lesson with unknown words in 5th grade. So easy to remember though. So it goes this way. Inside, I'm first going to look inside the word to see if there's any hints about the meaning. So that example that I was sent on the word settlement, I look in it and yes, the word settle. And so you go to a new place and you settle. And you might have a settlement then of other people coming to the same area and having a settlement. So that would give us a hint about the meaning of the word. But if that isn't enough, looking inside the word, then we look outside in the sentence. Are there any hints in the sentence about the meaning of the word? And if we still don't have an idea of the meaning, then we look at the surrounding sentences to see if there's any hints. And don't think I don't teach it this way. Look inside, look at the sentence, look at the surrounding sentence. Look inside, look at the sentence, look at the surrounding sentences. And ask yourself, what might the word mean? And when you have an idea, then you're going to try the meaning in the sentence and ask yourself, does it make sense? Now, this is something that every time I watch videos, I wish this was a big poster in every classroom. Does it make sense? Because I see so many students who have done this as their goal versus does it make sense? That they are doing a subtraction problem and the answer is actually larger than both of the numbers that they were working with. Does it make sense? If you were subtracting and taking something away that you'd end up with a bigger number? No. Or they're spelling a word and they don't look at it and ask themselves, is that correct spelling? Does it make sense? So to me, this is something that we need to constantly teach students because it's basically self-monitoring. The students are utilizing stopping and looking at it themselves. Now, how would we teach this? Well, we teach it exactly like we would teach any strategy to students. With I do it, we do it, you do it. I do it, we do it, you do it. So this is from a lesson that I taught students just to remind us of these steps. And of I do it, we do it, you do it, or I do, we do, you do. Wording that I coined long, long ago, I think in 1974, but is ubiquitous everywhere. In fact, the materials that I got from a number of the curriculum we're using consistently had I do, we do, you do in it, demonstration, guided practice, checking for understanding. So I'm not going to teach this lesson to you because we have much more to do, but the steps. So first I modeled it and I said, we read this, they read it to themselves, then we read it together. And I said, I am pretending that I don't know the word submerge. And I say to myself, do I know any part of the word? And I say, well, sub means under, like a submarine, okay, but I don't know the whole word. So then I have to go outside. So I read the sentence, a hippo can submerge in the water to stay cool under the hot African sunshine. And so I say to myself, submerge in the water. Okay, go, if a sub, go under the water to stay cool. But I'm still not certain that submerge would mean to go under. So let me see more. So then I say, okay, I'm going to read the surrounding sentence. A hippo can submerge in the water to stay cool under the hot African sunshine. Sometimes you can't even see the hippo in the watering hole. All right, so goes under the water and you can't even see it. So I say to myself, submerge must be to go under. Let's see if that makes sense. A hippo can go under in the water to stay cool under the hot African sunshine. Yes, that makes sense. So I would model the steps very step by step by step. And then I would guide the students. Oh, there is the submerged hippo. Cool. You know, the hippo can actually stay underwater about 10 minutes before it has to come up to breathe. Okay, I got to tell you the most interesting thing. The hippo actually has as its evolutionary neighbor the whale. Think about the similarities, the body type, the having to emerge, submerge, and emerge to breathe. So then we guided them and we started with a fairly easy example. And so we read it to ourselves, we read it together, and then I said, here's the word that we don't know, and the word is savannah. So first we look inside. Nothing there that really helps me out. So what do we do next? Yes, we look outside in the sentence. Read it. The hippo lives on the African savanna, a dry, hot grassland. Did the author tell us what a savanna was? Yes, a dry, hot grassland. Do we need to go any further? Not to figure out the meaning of that. We know a savanna is a dry, hot grassland. So then we went to one that was a little more difficult, and we did emerge and solitary. And in both cases, we guided them. What's the first thing we do, and the next step, and the next step. Now, here is what I would suggest, that whether you are a kindergarten teacher or a first or second or third or fourth or fifth grade, that you find at least one opportunity every single week to help students figure out the meaning of unknown words. Because English has such a huge lexicon of words that no matter what you're reading, you would come across, or what was being read to you, come across words that you did not know the meaning of, and you need to have intentionally figure out the meaning of the words. And practice over the years is necessary to get this skill down. So teaching kids to utilize, and this one uses parts of the words and it utilizes the context clues. All right, there's solitary. And then when I was done, I checked their understanding and again used that really easy review strategy. So be my students. And I'm going to echo, we're going to echo read the words. I'll say it, you say it. And submerge, submerge, savannah, savannah, emerge, emerge, solitary, solitary. And then I said, I'm going to tell you about one of these words as a review. Form the number on your table. When I say show me, not until then, put it in the air. So I'm thinking of a word that means to go underwater. Look over the list and show me. And number one, and what's the word? Submerge. I'm thinking of a word that means you do it all by yourself. Show me. And what is the word? Solitary. Excellent. All by yourself is solitary. Why I love about this, again, all I needed was the word list and it be numbered, and I could hold everybody accountable, but they need to not put it up until I say, show me, so kids won't just copy each other. But again, it leads right to that very, very good opportunities to respond in terms of holdups. Okay, compound words. Here's a time where you should teach kids a strategy. And the strategy is you read it left to right, bird, house. But when you go to figure out the meaning, you go to the second word and ask how it relates to the first. This is a house for birds. Starfish. It is a fish that is shaped like a star. Weekend. It's the end of the week. Raincoat. It's a coat you wear in the rain. And teaching kids that relationship, because it's more difficult to figure it out unless you go to the second word and ask how it relates to the first. Of course, it doesn't work for all words, like a butterfly is not a fly in the butter. But I'll tell you that this has some history. If we look back at the early 1800s, they were actually called not butterflies, but flutterbys. Flutterbys. Then it made sense. By you, they flutter. But over time, somehow it got reversed. And because fly is an insect, it became butterfly, and it lost its wonderful compound meaning. And hot dogs, I better look up the history of that one. All right, so what else should we teach students in terms of really empowering them in the meanings? And I know that this is something that particularly your district in terms of third, fourth, and fifth graders are working on, but some of them, some of the morphographic elements could be taught even younger and with your students. And so basically, so morphographic analysis, and I'm going to read when I stop, say the next word. Morphographic analysis is a strategy used to determine or infer the meanings of words by examining their meaningful parts. First part, inflectional endings. Say to yourself, what are some inflectional endings? I bet you said things like ed, ing, and s. Prefixes. Put up 5 fingers and say 5 prefixes to yourself. Okay, and so I said pre, re, dis, un, and I said those because those are the most common prefixes. And suffixes, 5 fingers, touch them and say 5 suffixes. Okay, so, and of course, there are many roots and bases. So it's examining these words for pronunciation, but also for meaning. Now, here are 2 terms that I said to myself, I better look them up one more time to make this distinction. And in most of the materials I've looked at, they either call all of these base words or all of them root words, but they do have a specific meaning. A base word is one that can stand alone, like the word instruct. So I could take the word instruct and add ton and have instruction. I could take instruct and add a ending and have instructor. So a root word, on the other hand, is one that cannot stand alone. Ject cannot stand alone. I'd have to add a prefix or a suffix, inject, injection, to make it a word. All right, so, and just to make this clear, the root words are mostly Greek and Latin based. All right, so, so prefixes. First of all, I want you to think about this. If we had prefixes and suffixes, I want you to put in the chat box really quickly, which one do you think is most worthy of our instructional time? Which ones make the most difference in terms of student learning, prefixes or suffixes? Just type that in. Loretta, give me feedback on it.
Everybody, prefix.
Prefix, and they are right. This has actually been studied by Graves of which one makes the most difference. Why? Well, here are the reasons that prefixes make more difference. That they're used in many words. Well, so are suffixes, but they are consistently spelled. And so pre is always spelled P-R-E. However, if we have a bull, it could be A-B-L-E or I-B-L-E. So some suffixes have more than one optional spelling. And prefixes are easy to identify. They come at the beginning of the word. And so there's pre and re and dis and miss, boom. And they also have clear meanings. Almost all of them do. And pre means before, and un means not, and dis means not, and in means not. And versus suffixes, many of their meanings are not clear, like T-I-O-N. If I was asked to tell the kids the meaning, I would say them, well, shun means the state of. Now, one day I did that teaching a middle school class, and this child raised his hand and he said, "Are you still talking about Michigan?" We have that on video, and it was a reminder to me of the challenge of suffixes, because often they're used to change the part of speech rather than to give definitive meaning. And so If you are going to pick one to emphasize, please go with prefixes and be certain that the students know un and re and in and dis. Those four account for 58% of all words with a prefix. Un, re, in, and dis. Now let's look at those again. Un means not, in means not, dis means not. Because the major function of prefixes is to negate. I remember getting an email from someone who taught a program I wrote called Rewards. And it is about reading multisyllabic words. It's designed for students in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. Well, I got this email saying, your program, you're such a positive person, but your program is so negative. And I said, why did you say that? Well, you know, you have words like unprofessional. I said, yes, because it's teaching children how to read long words by understanding the pronunciation of prefixes and suffixes, and the majority of prefixes negate. They take it to the negative. So I got an email back saying, oh, okay, it's not so negative. So here is the best recent list that I found on prefixes that should be taught in the elementary school before the kids go on to middle school. And they're listed by frequency of occurrence. And so you can check out the materials you're using to teach morphographic elements to be certain that these are taught. And then I included a list of, let's see if I can get that. So we'll come back to that. So how do we teach it? Well, pretty explicitly. So be my students. So a prefix is a word part attached to the beginning of English words that alters meaning. Sometimes prefixes help you figure out the meaning of words. Now, why is this so important? Sometimes. That's because in so many words in English, the prefixes have become embedded in the meaning and no longer carry their very clear meanings. So sometimes they're really helpful and sometimes they're less helpful. And this is important because kids get very frustrated when they've learned the meaning of it and it just doesn't help them figure out the meaning of another word, okay? Sometimes they help you. And so this prefix is un, and un means not. What does, or opposite, what does un mean? Not or opposite. Here are some examples. Untidy. So tidy means that you've cleaned everything away, you put things away, it's very clean. Untidy means it's not tidy. Unorganized. So I stack everything up very neatly, and it's very organized. And in my drawer, I have just certain materials like Post-its that I need. It's very organized. If it was unorganized, I couldn't find anything. So what's the word? Unorganized. So you explicitly introduce the meaning and introduce it in example words. And then you practice with the students. So let's read this word by parts. Unbreakable. Okay, and so now let's figure out the meaning of it. What is the prefix? Un. And what does un mean? Not or the opposite. And tell your partner what unbreakable might mean. And not breakable or the opposite of breakable. And listen to my sentence using unbreakable. The metal box is unbreakable. It cannot be broken. So we guide the students in the process of using the prefix to figure out the meaning. And then you might have them generate sentences, in this case, using unbreakable. So again, here's a little routine that you could consistently utilize and apply it to the prefixes you are introducing. And then we check their understanding so that they can determine a meaning. So using your knowledge of the prefix un, determine the meaning of the word and write a sentence that shows the meaning of the word. Unkind, not kind. Charles was unkind when he pushed a classmate down. Unlucky, not lucky. When you went to play bingo, you were unlucky and lost every game. So suffixes, here's the problem with suffixes. And certainly because I've spent my career studying multislavic words, I've mastered this challenge. So suffixes are added, as you well know, to the ending of English words, and they can change the part of speech or the meaning, so that they have two possibilities. They might change it from a verb to a noun. They might change it from a verb to an adjective, or they will have a definitive meaning, like full means full. And reading this with me, suffixes often have abstract or difficult to explain meanings. For example, shun indicates the state of being, as in completion, the state of being complete. A little bit more difficult. So there are some suffixes that have definitive meanings, like full. Helpful is full of help. Truthful, full of truth. Mouthful, full, filling up your whole mouth. Joyful, I hope that's what you have over Thanksgiving. But there is a reminder that doesn't always work, like grateful, full of great. So let's be grateful this Thanksgiving, and this would be a non-example of the utilization of the meaning of full. So here is the list of most common suffixes that should be taught before the students leave your intermediate grades to go to middle school. Now, why did I highlight some of these? Because one of the challenges is literally that the pronunciation wouldn't be what you'd expect. And so it's not tie on, it's shun. I'll never forget the day that I was teaching in a class and I said, this is not tie on, it is pronounced shun. And a boy raised his hand and said, Dr. Archer, tie on, you mean like you tie one on? And it was a 7th grade class. So stay in elementary school because it's so fascinating in middle school. Of course, when we teach this one, so many teachers say it's able, like depend able or viz able. And we need to teach the students that it is a bull. And it is not I, but if. So teaching the students the pronunciation of these. So now in terms of roots, you know, I've had so many people tell me we should go back to teaching Latin in our schools. Well, instead, what the research would support is when the opportunity emerges, you can teach the meaning of the word. We're not going to have a Latin class, but we could teach certain meanings. So 60% of English words come from a Greek or Latin root. But notice this. When we get into technological vocabulary, about 90% of the words are based on a Greek or Latin root. Aren't you fascinated by that? I am. So when we are teaching vocabulary for the purpose of getting a better on reading a passage, and we have certain words, we might say, I'm going to take this opportunity to teach the meaning of that root word. Remember, the roots are ones that don't stand alone. So one day I am teaching hydroelectricity. And I say to myself, this is electricity, and that is the function of moving water, hydro meaning water. And I said, I'm going to take this advantage to teach them the meaning of hydro. And so after introducing in hydroelectricity, I taught hydro, meaning water. And then I introduced words that included hydro. Though some cases the spelling was altered. So dehydration. And right there is hydra or hydro, and it means water. So no water. Hydroplane is a plane that lands on water. A hydrophone is a phone that you can talk on in the water. And they were particularly interested in, forgive me, I've got a new mouse here, in hydrophobia. You're afraid of water. Whoa, that would be hard in Portland, Oregon, where it rains and rains and rains some more. So I thought you might be interested in having a list of the most common Latin and Greek roots, because this is a way that we can make kids really interested in words, really interested in words. And so I was teaching students dorm. Dormant was the word in our passage, but it means sleep. And so I introduced dormitory. That if you go to college, you will likely sleep in a dormitory where, or go into the military, where many people are sleeping. And kids were very interested in how two words could be so different. So those are the most common ones. Are you going to have a class on this? No, but when a word comes up, let's say you're teaching telescope, and in it is scope, to look for. You might say, are there any words that also include scope, meaning to look at, that I could teach? So you could go to this list to find out some other examples that might get kids not only exposed to more words, but more interested in words. Now I'm looking at my clock and I only have a few minutes. And so I'm going to just tell you to look at these examples. The only problems that I see today in looking up words on an electronic dictionary, which is what most students would utilize. Many homes don't even have a dictionary anymore. But they're not going to have any trouble typing in the word. They're not going to have any trouble on it popping up, so they don't have to have all those location skills that we taught so carefully when we only had dictionaries. But here's what I do see having problems is understanding that if they look a word up and there are multiple meanings, how to figure out what meaning makes sense. And so this is something that we need to directly teach to students, starting with the big idea that if there's many meanings, consistently dictionaries will list the most common meaning first. So it is most likely to be used. But not always. So then we have to ask ourselves, try the next meaning and try it in the sentence. Does that make sense? Try the next meaning. Does that make sense? This is, to me, the most consistent challenge students have with using our current resources, where they'll list multiple definitions of figuring out which one. So we practice this. It is the same practice as using context clues, where we take the meaning and we try it in the sentence and ask ourselves, does that make sense? As Chad drove down the street, a rap streamed from his car. Okay. Rap streamed from his car. First one is a verb. Now this is talking about something, so it is likely to be a noun. So then I look down here. Oh, there's one meaning that is a noun, a popular form of music. As Chad drove down the street, a popular form of music streamed from his car. That would make sense. So this is another example where we had numerous sentences, and the students had to figure out, was the draft a version of something? Like, I wrote a first draft of a description of a podcast, or not a podcast, a webinar that I'm going to do in New York City. I wrote a first draft of it. Or a draft, cold air moving in a closed space, not even related. Okay, so air coming in would be a draft. Or in the US, a system in which young people are required to join the armed forces. A totally different kind of draft. Or a system by which professional sports teams choose players from college or high school. A draft. Whoa. So then we went back after we studied each of the definitions and then looked at the sentences, which draft it was. So we could teach kids inside, outside. We could systematically teach them morphographs, particularly prefixes and then suffixes. We could teach them how to handle compound words. And we could also teach them how to pick out the critical meaning of a word given a multi-meaning word. That probably takes us 1 minute beyond what time we're supposed to do. So you were asked to write down anything that you said, ooh, I want to do that. Ooh, that would be helpful in my class. So I would like you, as your exit ticket, to put that into our chat box. But in the meantime, if there are any questions, flood the chat box with it, or open your actual, I'm going to put you all on a, open up your audio and ask the question. So Loretta, you're looking for any questions? Excellent. But you are welcome to pop open your audio and ask the question directly. I'm going to put you on gallery so you can see everybody who's here. Everybody open up your cameras. Hi, Sarah, Tina, Michelle, good to see you. Michelle, that example came from Wit and Wisdom, came from your work. Excellent. And Todd, thanks for putting up your first name, and Nicole and Tracy. Excellent. Okay, did anybody have a question? Because this is your chance. Okay, raise your hand if there was something that you could take back to your classroom. Raise your hand if there was something you could take back, because if you don't raise your hand, I've got my evening still here. I can just go on and on. Okay, we're going to try that again. Raise your hand if there was something useful. Okay, good. All right, so you are free to go, but don't forget, put in your best idea as feedback to me before you leave. And if you're on the leadership team or administrator, you can stay after. And goodbye to everyone else. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Reflect on all that we were grateful for. It's my favorite holiday. And someone just today said, why is it your favorite holiday? And I said, well, it's a celebration of gratitude. And I usually have a party for 40 years. I've had a gratitude party on Friday, but for 2 years, I've not been able to have it. Obviously, 60 people is not a good thing. But I said to the person, here's why I love it. because there's no disappointment in Thanksgiving. You expected turkey, you got it. And so that's exactly why I love it, and gratitude. So thank you guys. Have a great holiday week. I will see you again in December. Bye-bye.